My girlfriend and I always enjoyed weekend camping trips. We used to live in the Appalachian Mountains of Virginia, so we found new places there. Our work lives were stressful, so we needed nature and time away from home on the weekends. We had been on dozens of camping trips in the Appalachian Mountains, but none of them had ever ended like this. On Saturday morning, we decided on a very small 3-mile trail that leads to a nice, isolated camping ground on a flatter part of the mountain. We had never been to the specific spot before, but from the amount of reviews the trail had on Google, we assumed it was a pretty well. We had been on many camping trips in the Appalachian Mountains, but none of them had ended like this. On Saturday morning, we decided on the 3-mile trail, which leads to a nice, isolated camping ground on a flatter part of the mountain. We had never been to the specific spot before, but we had read many reviews about it on Google, so we knew it was a well-known trail and campgrounds. We got our bags ready and packed the truck with our camping gear. Then, we made our way out there. It was only a 45-minute drive from our house, but as we got closer, it began raining quite a bit. This was pretty normal around the mountains here, so it didn't bother us. We didn't want to turn around, even though it was raining. We pulled up to the trailhead, which was just off the side of the mountain road, and there was another car parked on the side. We expected more people, given the trail's popularity, but we were glad it wasn't crowded. As we got our gear out, my girlfriend pointed out that the parked car's passenger door was cracked a few inches. We looked around for the owner, but there was no one around. I went over and closed the door. We continued to the trailhead. We assumed the owner must have accidentally left it open. The passenger seat was already soaked from the rain, but at least it wouldn't get any worse. I came back to our car to grab my stuff, and then we both started making our way down the trail. We talked about how weird it was that the door was open. Most people would probably notice that their car wouldn't even lock due to the open door. It's worth mentioning that it was clearly a pretty expensive newer car, which made it all the more bizarre. At this point, the rain picked up, so we started walking faster to get to the campsite and set up our tent. It took us about 2 hours to get to the end, as it was mostly uphill. Once we were there, the first thing we noticed was a tent already set up in the middle of the flat area. It was pretty small, definitely a one. It was clearly a pretty expensive, newer car, which made it all the more peculiar. The rain picked up at this point, so we started walking faster to get to the campsite and set up our tent. It took us about 2 hours to get there, as it was mostly uphill. Once we arrived, the first thing we noticed was a tent already set up in the flat area. It was pretty small, definitely a one-person tent. We figured they were probably in there sheltering from the rain. So we went to a far corner of the site and set up our tent. We sat inside for an hour, eating some food we brought and laying some of our stuff out to dry. Then we heard voices outside. The rain hitting the tent was too loud to hear what they were saying, so I unzipped the front and looked out. I jumped a little bit when I saw 2 men kneeling down and looking at us from just a couple feet away. They smiled and introduced themselves when they came over. They said they were staying in the tent in the middle and that they'd been there a few days. I quickly introduced my girlfriend and me and told them that we were just there for the night. Then they left, and I zipped up our tent and looked at my girlfriend. The whole interaction felt a little off, and they seemed to be acting strangely. I noticed that both men were wearing tight jeans and regular t-shirts. Shirts in their tent was way too small to be fitting 2 full-grown men. They were clearly not here camping or hiking, and they definitely weren't there for a few days like they had said. We decided to leave the zipper partially open so we could keep an eye on them, just in case. Another hour went by, and we didn't see anything unusual. Actually, we didn't see anything at all. They were most likely just cramped up in their tent the whole time. It was pretty dark out at this point, so we decided to call it a night and get our sleeping bags ready. I zipped the tent back up and laid down next to my girlfriend. I must have fallen asleep pretty fast, though, because I didn't even remember I was in my tent when I heard voices. I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. Then I heard a zipper open in the tent next to mine. It was dark, so I decided to go to sleep. I closed the tent and lay down next to my girlfriend. I fell asleep quickly. When I woke up a few hours later, I needed to use the bathroom. It was still raining, so I put on one of my cheap plastic rain ponchos so that I wouldn't have to go back to bed soaked. I went a few feet behind our tent and behind one of the trees. I woke up a few hours into the night, having to use the bathroom. It was still raining, so I put on one of my cheap plastic rain ponchos so that I wouldn't have to go back to bed soaked. I headed out a few feet behind our tent and behind one of the trees, but through the rain, I could hear voices. It was hard to tell where they were coming from, though. I turned my head all around, looking in every direction as I started to get a little paranoid. I didn't see anyone. Then, I looked over at the small tent in the middle and noticed the front zipper was open. It was hard to see in the darkness. I looked through the rain, and I was pretty sure that nobody was in there. I knew the men had told me that they were staying the night in the tent. This made me even more worried. I ran over to my tent, shook my girlfriend awake, and told her about the situation. She was clearly tired, but I could tell. She was just as worried as I was. We discussed what to do. We heard voices coming from behind our tent. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew sitting in the tent didn't feel safe. I told my girlfriend to pack the bags quickly and be ready to leave if we had to. Then, I grabbed a small. I was as worried as she was. We were discussing what to do when we heard voices coming from behind our tent. I didn't know what to do, but I knew that sitting in the tent didn't feel safe. I told my girlfriend to pack the bags quickly and be ready to leave if we had to. Then, I grabbed a pocket knife and quickly got out. I looked over at the trees and saw the two men from earlier standing just a few feet from our tent. I remember this moment very clearly. Both men looked at me with absolutely no emotion. They didn't make any facial expressions or even move. I knew at that moment that these men were planning on doing something horrible. They weren't scared of me at all. A second later, my girlfriend looked out of the tent, which took me out of my state of shock. I yelled at her to go, pointing at the trail back down the mountain. I followed after her, leaving my bag in the tent behind. I looked back. Just as we reached the campsite's edge, the two men remained, unmoving. They didn't pursue us. They merely stood, watching us run away, our hearts pounding with fear. For 10 minutes, we sprinted. Then, we slowed and walked quickly for the rest of the way. We reached the edge of the campsite, where the two men were standing. They didn't chase us. They just watched as we ran away. We sprinted for 10 minutes before slowing down and walking quickly for the rest of the way. When we returned to the car, we saw that the other parked car was still there, but the passenger door was open. I immediately drove us to the nearest gas station. We called the police, and they met us a few minutes later to talk about what had happened. A few days later, we received more information. It made everything even more terrifying. An officer went down to investigate the area. They found that the car belonged to an older man who had recently been reported missing. All of the belongings from the car had been stolen. They were able to confirm that the tent on the campground was the older man's. They didn't find the two men, and they didn't find any real evidence other than their shoe prints. The old man wasn't found either, and as far as I know, he still has never turned up. This made my girlfriend and me both feel sick knowing that we could have been just seconds away from something horrible. I will never know for sure what those two men were up to, but I can make a good guess based on the whole situation. What I do know is that the image of those two men standing in front of me haunts my memories to this day. Foreign enough to have a job that allowed me to in my late 20s and early 30s, I traveled a lot for work, but I was limited to how much I could do when I was staying somewhere nice. I had a job in Pennsylvania for a week and ended up finishing a day early, which meant I had to stay an extra day before my flight. I decided to use this time to my advantage and do something fun. I chose a long trail that went through some of the area's pretty forests and trees. I've always really enjoyed nature, but my job forced me to be. My job had me in buildings or planes 24/7, so this was my chance to enjoy the nice weather and scenery. I woke up early, but I had to go to the store to buy hiking clothes since I didn't pack any. The trail was about an hour from my hotel, and I got there just before 12 p.m. It was empty, which I was happy about. I looked up the trail online. It said it would take about 6 hours there and back. This was an all-day trip. I had a backpack with a water bottle and snacks, so I brought them. I started down the trail. The first hour was really nice. It was peaceful and relaxing. I noticed a man sitting. He was sitting on the ground next to the path up ahead. He looked like he was sleeping, head down, with a hoodie covering his face. As I got closer, he looked up at me, staring. I had no idea what to make of him, but it was creepy, so I kept checking. He was lying on the ground next to the path. His head was down, and he was wearing a hoodie that covered his face. I started to get closer, and he looked up at me, staring me down as I walked past him. I didn't know what to make of him, but it was creepy, so I kept checking behind me. After a couple of hours, I got a little tired and hungry, so I found a small log on the edge of the path and sat down to have a snack. I was probably there for 3 or 4 minutes before the man that I'd walked past earlier appeared down the path. He was still a good distance away, so I quickly packed my bag and continued down the trail to avoid interaction. My plan didn't work, though. A few minutes later, I heard loud running footsteps coming up behind me. I saw the man jogging in my direction and moved over to the side, hoping he would just pass by. He ended up stopping right in front of me. He was still a good distance away, so I decided to quickly pack my bag and continue down the trail. I didn't want to interact with him. I was wrong. A few minutes later, I heard loud running footsteps coming up behind me. I saw the man jogging in my direction. I moved over to the side, hoping he would just pass by. He ended up stopping right in front of me. I was nervous and uneasy. He didn't say anything. He reached into his pocket and then held out a wallet. He said, "I think you dropped this." The wallet wasn't mine, and it was empty. I told him he must be mistaken. "I didn't bring my wallet with me," he responded, telling me he knew this was my wallet and that I needed to take it back. I was uneasy, but I didn't know how to respond. I could see he was upset. I thought he was trying to rob me, but I didn't know what to do. I agreed, picked up the wallet, and he smiled and said, "You're welcome." Then he left. I paused for a minute to process the interaction I just had. Then I held out the wallet and looked at it more closely. It was one of those typical brown folding wallets. It looked pretty worn and old. I opened it up and checked every pocket. There wasn't a single thing in there. I was confused. I didn't know what to think, but I knew I didn't want to run into this man again. So I started making my way back to my car. It was 4 p.m. I had just over 2 hours left before I had to get back to my car. I tried to enjoy the walk, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It was making me nervous. I kept looking around to make sure he wasn't following me. Finally, I saw my car up ahead. The sun was just and I had just over 2 hours left before I had to get back to my car. I tried to enjoy the walk, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It was making me nervous. I kept looking around to make sure he wasn't following me. Finally, I could see my car up ahead. The sun was beginning to set, casting a long shadow on everything. My car was parked facing the trail, so I was walking towards the front of it. Once I was a few feet away, I noticed a man's shadow coming from behind the car, as if he was crouched down. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the shadow next to my car. I knew that running away would end badly, but I was also certain that the man was going to try to steal my car and rob me. I reached into my pocket to feel for my keys. In a few seconds, I unlocked the car and got in through the passenger door. I knew that running away would end badly, but I was also certain that he was going to try and steal my car and rob me. I reached into my pocket to feel for my keys. I unlocked the car and got in through the passenger side. I could hear the man instantly jump up and run straight for the driver's side door. I locked it from the inside just before he tried to open it. He started banging on the window as I crawled into the driver's seat and turned on the car. I could clearly see it was the same man from earlier, and he began screaming at me till I saw the man jump up and run straight for the driver's side door. I locked it from the inside just before he tried to open it. He started banging on the window as I crawled into the driver's seat and turned on the car. It was the same man from earlier. He began screaming at me to give him the wallet back. I ignored him and reversed out of there onto the main road, where I drove away as quickly as I could. As I was pulling away, he ran back onto the path and into the trees. I guess my plan had worked. It had thrown him off by not going to the driver's side door, and it had given me time to get in and lock it. I gave him the wallet back. I ignored him and drove away. As I was pulling away, he ran back onto the path and into the trees. My plan had worked. He was thrown off by not going to the driver's side door. This gave me time to get in and lock it. There was a police station I remembered seeing on the way, so I stopped there. I went inside to report the man and give them the wallet. Then I headed back to the hotel. I called one of my friends to tell them about it that night. It was just such a crazy situation. It's pretty obvious he was either trying to rob me or steal my wallet, my car, but I'm still puzzled by the wallet. I'm glad I made it out safely and didn't lose anything. Now, I always carry a pocket knife when I go for walks because you never know what crazy situations might arise. You can find yourself in crazy situations. It was near the end of October last year, which always makes for the best hiking weather as it's not too hot and not too cold. I had a group of friends that I'd go hiking with a lot, but most of them had jobs with no set schedules, which would make it hard to find days where we could plan a hike together. So I was happy that I was able to make it out safely and without losing anything. I always carry a small pocket knife with me whenever I go for walks. I often went on shorter hikes alone to enjoy the peace and quiet. I had the weekend off, so I found a nice hiking and camping trail nearby and drove up there on Saturday morning. I had been on this trail a couple of years before and had always wanted to go back. It was a loop trail, so it basically went in a big loop. It was about a day and a half long. I parked my car in a small gravel lot and made my way to the trailhead. The first few miles were flat and went through grassy fields before eventually leading into a forest at the bottom of a small mountain. At this point, it was probably midday and I was well into the forest when I saw a man coming up ahead. At first, I couldn't tell if he was walking towards her or away from me, but as I continued forward, I realized he was coming towards me. This wasn't a very popular trail, and the last time I hiked it, I don't think I saw anyone, but it was the weekend, and I was deep in the forest when I saw a man coming up the trail. At first, I couldn't tell if he was heading toward her or away from me, but as I kept going, I realized he was coming right at me. This wasn't a popular trail, and the last time I hiked it, I don't think I saw anyone. But it was the weekend, and I figured maybe he just had the same idea as me. As he got closer, I noticed he didn't have a backpack, which was pretty unusual. I'd probably been down the trail for 6 or 7 hours by then, and there was no way someone would go this far without even a water bottle. He waved at me once he was a few feet ahead. I returned the gesture. I'm pretty sure this guy knows what he's doing. He's got no backpack, which is weird for this area. I've been hiking for 6 or 7 hours, and no one would go this far without a water bottle. He waves at me once he's a few feet ahead. I return the gesture, but I'm still being cautious because we're in such an isolated area. Then I hear his footsteps stop, and the dirt crumbles as if he turned around. I look back, and sure enough, he's facing me. Then he asks me something really strange. Where's your group? I'm not sure how to respond, as all I can think about is I was wondering if this stranger knew that I usually had a group, or if he was just trying to figure out that I was alone. Either way, it was unsettling and made me really nervous. I responded, telling him that they were on their way, a couple minutes behind me. I couldn't think of anything else to say, but I definitely didn't want this man. I didn't want him to think I was alone. He replied, then smiled, and started walking again. I continued on in the opposite direction, and a few hours later, I spent most of the time thinking about that guy and how weird the whole situation was. The fact that he didn't have a backpack so deep into the hike made the whole thing even more unsettling. His backpacklessness only added to the eeriness of the situation. I decided to set up my camp a safe distance from the trail. I found a flat area about half a mile from the trail and pitched my tent. As the sun set, I sat outside and tried to stop thinking about the guy I had packed a lunch for the trip, so I got it out and finished it before laying in the tent to try and get some sleep. I was lying there for probably over an hour, unable to sleep, when I heard footsteps coming from the trees behind my tent. I froze, listening to them moving towards me. I tried to reason with myself, but I couldn't. I packed a lunch for the trip and ate it in the tent before trying to sleep. I was lying there for over an hour, unable to sleep, when I heard footsteps coming from the trees behind my tent. I froze, listening to them move toward me. I told myself it was probably just some animal, but the steps were unmistakable. It sounded like they were 15 to 20 feet away when they suddenly stopped. I waited there for what felt like hours, lying still and listening intently, with my heart racing. There were no more footsteps. I knew they were definitely nearby. I would have heard the footsteps fade out if they had left. More hours passed, and the sun was just starting to rise. I knew I had to get out of there. I was so tired that I questioned if I had somehow not heard the footsteps going away. I unzipped the tent. I lifted the flap up a little to peek outside, but I didn't see anything. I got out and looked around. It was very quiet, and the trees were blocking most of my view, but from what I could see, nobody was there. After a few minutes, I cautiously packed up my tent, still looking around frequently, as I was definitely on edge. Every small noise made me jump that I attached my tent to my bag and started heading back towards the trail as quickly as I could. I only made it a few steps before noticing clear footprints in the dirt just behind a tree that was right by where I had my tent. I began panicking and didn't even look for any more footsteps. As I sprinted towards the trail, I was terrified. I knew there was someone stalking me in the middle of an isolated forest, hours away from anywhere safe. Once I got back to the path, I quickly began walking back down the way I came. It was probably quicker at this point just to continue down, but I figured that whoever was I ran to the trail, certain that someone was stalking me in the middle of an isolated forest, far from anywhere safe. Once I got back to the path, I started walking quickly down the way I came. It was probably quicker to continue down, but I figured that whoever was watching me would probably be waiting for me to do that. Luckily, nothing else happened the whole way back to my car, which I didn't get to until nearly sunset. I told my friends about the strange man and what I heard and saw, and they all said that I was lucky to get out of there without anything else happening. I reported the suspicious activity on the trail to the police, but they couldn't do much. I'm more cautious when hiking and camping now, and I rarely go without my friends. I'll never know what that guy's true intentions were, and I hope nobody else has to know either. Thank you.